Welcome to day 4, part 2. This is the part where I get to share my experience on a paranormal investigation with a couple of friends. And before I get into that, I want to share something that I found out after the investigation, and that is Anthony Ceballos has been on my show, and we met at New Orleans Fear Fest Paracon, and that was a fun experience. And I missed investigating with him there, and so when I was told him I was coming down to his area, we arranged an investigation, and so I was excited to do that. And all I knew was I was meeting someone for the first time named Lurker. And so I was like, okay, this will be cool. And investigated with them. And then I find out that it's one of my Facebook friends on and didn't even realize it. So I was like, oh, I got to investigate with you too. That's so cool. And so with that being said, I am now going to get into sharing with you my investigation that I got to take part in San Antonio. And so, this investigation, I met Wraith and Lurker at a gas station, and from there, I followed them to the site. And you park on the street, and off to the side, there's a little area, and you approach this bridge. Now, my understanding, and I'll have to ask Wraith if I have this wrong, but I believe this bridge is the famous Donkey Lady Bridge, which is haunted by a lady who obviously owned a donkey, hence the name Donkey Lady Bridge. And I will start by saying what was really unique is even though the moon was out, you could not see anything off of the sides of the bridge. It was like pitch black on both sides. And so I was like, wow, that's really interesting. You don't even see the water, you don't see anything. And so we start walking in, and I start to hear stories about what's happened here. And it's been dubbed the Haunted Forest. Now, this forest is divided into little sections of depending on what tribe, nation is in the area, spirit wise. And so we walked in, and there were some kids goofing off, so we used a death whistle to scare them away. No harm done, but we were walking up this path, and I'm hearing about how a friend of mine from Ghost Geeks was there and what happened with him. And so I was getting curious. Well, as we're walking, you can hear things moving around in the trees of the forest. I mean, it almost, at one point, I thought, are there monkeys around here? Because it sounds like something's jumping from tree to tree. And I also could hear the leaves on the ground rustling. And so I was trying to figure out, are there guardian spirits around, or are there animals out there? Well, we reached the spot to where Chad from Ghost Geeks got to. And we talked about footprints in the ground, and it wasn't very clear, but there was a huge storm recently that went through, so the ground could have been covered up where where the footprints were, but I could feel something was definitely there. And I could feel like there's a portal on one side, portal on another side, and we were caught in the middle. With that being said, I felt something draw me to the right. So I turned to my right. I start walking into the woods, not very far, and I noticed something on the ground. Well, as I'm noticing something on the ground, I'm hearing all kinds of leaves rustling around me, and Lurker I see coming up, and I go to Lurker. We're surrounded. There is something all around us. Well, we in turn find out the object on the ground was the back of like a 1980s large TV set. And when I say large, I mean the big squares where you had the back sticking out. And so we were trying to figure out why this would be here. And I started feeling like, something's definitely watching. So I turn and Lurker standing to my right. And I turn a little bit, and all of a sudden I look over at Lurker and I go, "What do you need?" And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You just tugged on my vest, my hoodie." And he said, "I didn't touch you. My hands are holding something up, and I swear I didn't touch you." And so I was like, "Okay, what just walked up on me and was able to do that?" And I started to scan the area. Nothing's around, no critters. So we turn around and we start walking back and find out the TV set back has been there for a while, so it's nothing new. But you definitely get the sense of time distortion there, of something just, it's there, but it's not there. You could say something to do with dimensional phasing. But another thing is we then decided to walk a little bit further up the path, and things just started getting to be quiet, and which kind of admittedly put me on nerve because I was already feeling a little bit tested by Wraith and Lurker and the forest itself to see how in tune am I, how aware am I. And sorry, I put a throat drop in to keep my throat from making me cough. I look to my left out of the corner of my eye. I see for like maybe from here to here, this lady in white just moving so fast next to me. And I turn and I look at Wraith and I'm going, "Did you guys just see that?" And he goes, "What?" And I said, "There was a lady in white that just went by." He goes, "You saw the lady of the forest?" And in that moment, I felt really special. I was like, wow, I seen, this great spirit of the forest. How many people can say they've seen that? And we're talking, and I'm kind of starting to get more in tune with the forest and what's around. And we decide to turn around, and he shows me the other path that you can take. That was originally where we went straight. There's a path to the left. So we take the path to the left, and he makes a point of showing me the entire path. It was a little short path that dead end into the river that goes underneath the Donkey Lady Bridge. And so I'm like, okay, that's really cool. And as we're standing there, and I'm facing going back into the forest area with the river at my back, I say to him, there's something off to our right. I can definitely sense something's over there watching us. And Wraith was like in agreement. He's like, oh yeah, there's definitely something over there, but there's no path over there. So it's not like, people are walking up and that's what I'm feeling. It is woods and the riverbank. So we start walking back and we take a left to go deep into the forest on this hiking trail. And I start to notice the trees seem to be in a different kind of way. It's like I could see the trees, but there was like a haziness to them to where it's like you wonder, is there something in front of the tree or is there something, are the trees really there? Kind of feeling of going, what am I seeing here? It doesn't have the same look like you when you look outside your window at a tree. And yes, it's nighttime and it's moonlight, but still, you have to experience it to understand really what I'm trying to say. But we go further up the path and we see dark patches, just like we saw over the river at the bridge where you can't see the ground, you can't see anything, but there's moonlight on the other side. And so we found that it's really strange. And we got to this one point, and off to the right, Wraith says, hey, do you want to go check out this chair? And I was like, sure. I've sat in a chair in the mountains of France. You know what? Why not? Let's experience this chair. Let's see what it's all about. And we walk over this debris on the ground where some limbs had fallen. And there's also trees that are bent over as if they just naturally grew that way, which is kind of strange. And then we walk a little bit to the right and we take a short little walk to the left. And he goes, turn around. I turn around and there is no path behind us. It has completely disappeared. And in my mind, I'm thinking, we haven't walked that far. I should still be able to see the path. So I'm starting to get what he's talking about with this forest. And he goes, do you feel it? I said, yeah, it feels a lot cooler in here than it did out there, which is usually the sign of, you could say, crossing into another dimension or interdimensional rift. It's where you're in between two different realms or, sorry, different, planes. You're in that in between space where it's got a kind of mystical feel and a feel of just calmness, actually, in my opinion. And so we walk a little bit and we get to the chair, and he's sitting there. I pull out the Spirit Talkers app and we get a little bit of activity with it, but not much. So I turn it off, and I'm noticing on my body cam the IR night vision and regular mode, even if I turn a flashlight on, is very limited, more so than usual. And so he says, yeah, that's normal. So I'm not sure what I have on my body cam, if anything, from this entire trip through this forest. But I just turn around up at the chair and I'm looking back towards where we came in. And there's like this white milky mist all across, almost like you would describe a portal. Like If you were to say, like, Stargate makes it look blue, the watery look. Well, this was white, milky looking. And Wraith looks at me and says, all right, let's see how good your senses really are, how in tune you are, because you have to open your mind to get through here. You have to expand your mind, in essence, and be mindful of your thoughts, because what you bring in is what the forest will bring you and will bring up for you. So it's kind of like the tree in Dagobah, if you're a Star Wars fan on Empire Strikes Back. But with that being said, I start walking and I noticed I'm taking a couple of right turns and everything, and I'm further to the left of the chair than when I started. And I'm facing it, and I'm halfway up and I look up and I see the chair, and I said, wait a minute, I'm walking in a circle. I need to stop, turn around, and I could kind of tell from Wraith and Lurker, they were like, oh, he figured it out maybe a little bit sooner than a lot of people do. Not a lot of people have been in here. He doesn't take a lot of people. But I start to look at my surroundings, and within probably, it took us, I would say, 6 minutes maybe to get to the chair from the path. And it probably took us 12 to 15 minutes, it feels like, to go back to where we started from on the path. But he was surprised that I actually got us back to the same spot we went in. He said normally when he and Lurker come out, they're further up the path. And so I thought that was a little interesting to note. And so we continued walking further into the woods, and I'm starting to feel like, this is a really cool place. And I'm noticing the stars above, taking in my whole surroundings. And we noticed this path on the left. And he says to me, he goes, look how clear that path is. And I said, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And, what's back there? And he goes, well, if you go too far, you're going to fall and you could break your leg, because there's a drop off towards a river there. And he's like, we're on like a canyon, actually. So I was like, okay, mental note, make sure I don't go too far if I go in there. Well, we walk a little further up. Then we turn and we look to the left, and he goes, watch this. And he walks into the woods, touches a tree, comes back out, and then he says, you saw how I did that? Didn't touch anything, right? I said, yeah. Put a flashlight on. There were branches blocking the path. And I was like, huh. I don't remember seeing him step over. So he literally walked through these branches. But how did he walk through the branches? How did this work? And so he was like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. There's something interesting about this forest. Well, we walk up the path a little bit more, and he goes, do you want to try it? And I said, yeah. And there was a path off to the left. So I turned left, I went, and I feel like I went in to the right quite a few steps, and standing there, and I'm looking into this clearing, and in the clearing I see what looks like an indigenous tribal home, people walking around like a community, is there, and I'm just seeing a part of it. And I noticed there's like a white milky hue to it, so I'm like, this isn't actually here. This is like, either I'm seeing the past or a different timeline or a different dimension where this is here, but I'm not there. So I'm looking at it and I come back and they show me by flashlight I walked through branches and I never felt a branch on my leg or against my arms. And it was a short turn to the right where I was standing. Well, I'm sitting there and I'm looking and going, this is really interesting. I want to investigate this some more. So we go to another spot and I go, here's a good spot. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, I want to, let's try it here. And there was a clearing and I walked in it and I walked out of it. And sure enough, there were branches across it, just like he had found earlier. So I was able to see him like he could, which was interesting. And I looked at him and I said, let's do an experiment. What if I'm standing over there and we turn the flashlight on? Will the branches appear? And he looks at me and he's kind of like goes, oh my God. I go, what? He goes, I've never done that. I've always wanted to do that, but I've never done that. How did you get that idea? How did you know I wanted to do that? And so we started to go and theorize either I have been here before because I'm recognizing the forest, or on a different timeline, he and I were there and talked about this. But we have different theories and no answers really as to why or how this worked. But so I walk through, we turn on the lights, you see the branches, I am on the other side, and then we turn the light off and I'm able to walk through. And so it's really interesting how the light brings these branches into existence where the darkness, they're not there. And it's only in certain areas. And so Wraith had warned me, and so did Lurker, you got to listen to the forest and be careful because it can be dangerous. And I wanted to see what was further down. They were like, no, don't go further down. I was like, oh, I'm just going to go a few steps. Well, in the process of trying to get those few steps in the dark, because the path appeared clear, it was anything but clear. I ended up walking into a thorn vine, and my legs getting caught up in thorns. And so I actually I was wearing some jeans that actually the thorns went through the jeans and cut my leg a little bit up. And so I was surprised by that. And the whole night for a while afterwards, I kept feeling like the thorns kept scratching me, kept scratching me. And I was like, I get the lesson. I'm going to listen from now on. No more venturing beyond, what you have cleared for me to do. And we get to this path that it veers off to the left or it curves to the right. And he goes, well, if we go to the right, we're going to go to an indigenous hut that's up there that a family actually lived in. They have a picture of the family. And I thought that'd be cool to see. Why not? I'm here. And he goes, to the left, it's really dark. See that? And I said, yeah. He goes, Wendigos live there. And in my head, I'm thinking, I've never encountered a cryptid. I don't want to encounter a cryptid, by choice. So I said to him, let's veer off to the right. Well, as we are going up the path and curving, I can hear this rustling and I can see the outline shapes of probably two or three wendigos looking at us and judging, are we going to cross into their turf or are we going to stay on the protected path? And we stayed on the protected path, and we make a turn, and there's this bar with chicken wire guarding so that you can't fall into the lower area of the canyon below. That's an edge, and there's an incline. So people apparently have fallen and risked going over the edge. So they put the chicken wire to stop you from going over the edge. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden the thorn feeling stops. And I'm like, good. I finally got that cleared off. And I'm talking with him, and I'm starting to notice the stars. There's something about the stars. But I don't say anything yet because I'm not quite sure. And the energy feels different. And he goes, we're crossing into a different territory of the forest. So we walk up and we get to a certain point, and we look, and I look up at the moon, and off to the right is Orion's belt. Off to the left, it seems like a dimmer, less bright Orion's belt. And I'm looking and I'm noticing it's like the stars are mirrored. Stars don't mirror. There are no two constellations alike. So this is an impossibility under our normal science. And so I'm watching this, trying to figure out and wrap my head around, how am I seeing two Orion constellations? And he mentions this part of the forest is known as the mirror part, where you can whatever. And so imagine it as when you've seen a door, you're walking to the other side of the door to a universe looking at your side of the door. And so everything is reversed or mirrored. And I started to feel like, wow, this is really kind of weird. And I don't know if it's because we're stopping a lot to talk or what, but it seems like a little bit of time has passed, but not a lot. Like, I wouldn't say like hours have passed, but it seems like a pretty good amount of time, maybe an hour. And I'll explain why I'm pointing that out at this point in a little bit. So we get up, we see the indigenous home. I take some photos, and we pull out the apps. We run Spirit Talker. We both have it. And Lurker goes off and does something with AI. And they have this program of AI that is really actually interesting, how interactive it is. And so I have him coming up on an episode, and not this week, but next week. So I'll have him explain that on the episode. And we're going to be talking all about this forest, his experiences there, what he remembers of my experience that I may have forgotten. But so we decide it's time to head back because we got to get up early for stuff. So we start heading back, and Lurker's hanging back because he wants to finish his experiment. But we're all staying within voice range of each other. Well, we turn and we hit that spot where the path goes off to kind of like where a lot of wendigos live and have been reportedly been seen. And we went straight on the path back towards the cars. Well, Lurker came around the corner and saw us go right. So he's going down the path towards the Wendigo hive or nest or whatever you want to call their home, and realizes as he's getting closer and closer to the dark spot, we're not there. He's calling for us, we're not responding. So he turns around and is like, I'm not going any further. He gets to the path, turns right, and we're just a little bit ahead of him standing there. And we had stopped because the moon is directly above us, shining down. But when you look at the path ahead, where it kind of does a winding maneuver, you don't see the path. It's completely darkened out. And it's like a black patch. And as you take a step closer to it, all of a suddenly this darkness turns into almost like a shadowy color where you can, like twilight, where you can see clearly. It's not pitch black. You can see the trees, you can see everything. But the path was like this. And then you see it shift to where it lies. And so we walked forward, and I'm like looking over at Wraith, and I'm going, did you just see the path move? And he goes, yes. And you notice how it's getting brighter. You can see the path again. And I was like, yeah, this happened to us 3 more times. And there are objects there where it looks really tall and it has like almost like a shape to where you would think there is something there. But when you get close enough to it or you shine a light on it in the distance, it's something short and completely different. So we're like, okay, something is able to shapeshift here and it shows itself in the dark. But, gotta keep your eye out. Well, he then tells me this story of how he had a couple there with him. And he said, go ahead. I want to check something out. Just take your path to the left and you'll be at your cars. Well, the lady returns and goes, we got lost and I can't find my husband. Well, all of a sudden, this really tall image of a man starts walking towards them. And the closer it gets to them, it starts shrinking in size. And when it gets close enough to them, he's normal sized. And it's the husband. And he's asking them how to get back to the car. He can't figure it out. And Wraith is like, you either go to the right or the left. There's only two options. How are you getting lost? Even if you went to the right, you would have hit a dead end and you would turn around and go back. Well, he got there, and instead of 2 paths, there was 3 paths. And couldn't figure out. He himself was like, wait, which is the right path? This doesn't look familiar. This orientation's not supposed to be here. Where are we? And so they took a moment, and all of a sudden, the third path disappeared, and the normal paths reappeared. And they started walking to the left, back towards the car. And they had, that was the end of their adventure. Well, not the same for us. So the three of us are walking back towards the cars, and we are like, wow, it took us a little while, maybe an hour and a half to walk that forest, so not so bad. The body felt a little sore from walking a lot, but all in all, it was like, no big deal. Well, we get to the bridge and we look over, and on our right side, heading back towards the cars, you can see the running water where the water is crossing over rocks. So you can see that, you can see all the water moving. And I thought this is interesting because when we started an hour and a half ago, you couldn't see the water. So I went to the other side. The water is crystal clear like glass, no movement whatsoever. And you can see that it's water. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, that's running water on one side of the bridge. Something under the bridge is stopping the movement, and it's stagnant still on the right. That's not possible for water. Water, if it's moving into something, will just move until it can't move no more. There's nothing to block it. Well, we get to our cars and we decided to take and remember to take some photos to be like, yeah, I was here, how cool is this? And survived kind of mode. We realized we started at 11 o'clock at night, and it was 2:30 in the morning when we got out of the forest. And by the time we were done with the photos and talking and driving back, I got back to the hotel to park the car around probably 3:15. Walked over to the Alamo, took some pictures as I mentioned in the prior video, and went back to the room and talked to Captain Rob, who woke up when I walked in. I tried to be as quiet as possible. But so that was my adventure into the haunted forest. Hope you all enjoyed hearing my story. I can't explain a lot of what happened. I'm still trying to wrap my head around a lot of what happened. And so please click the like button, or as they call it here, the rumble button. It helps with the algorithms. And stay tuned for let me see what date that is, on the 23rd of April, when I have Anthony, or aka Wraith, on Riding Through the Unknown, which is a Wednesday night. And keep your eye out for that episode because we are dedicating it to the haunted forest. So maybe amongst the two of us talking to each other, we might be able to make some sense out of it, how it works. But right now, all I can say is it has me thinking. I'm still processing. So blessings to you all. Have a wonderful night, a wonderful day, and I will share with you soon the next adventures on our road trip. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Bye bye.